Guys, welcome to the first episode of We the Parents. This is sort of an impromptu episode, and I have a special guest, Dean Tong, is going to be joining me. He's a certified forensic consultant and child abuse expert who worked with John Mast, who was obviously his client. And John was murdered, sadly, on Friday. And that's why we're starting this podcast early. We wanted to bring Dean on, and we want to talk about what's going on with family law, parental alienation, and the things that the system are missing. And I'm going to bring Dean on and let him introduce himself, because nobody knows Dean better than Dean. Dean and I just met, actually, through a mutual friend, Jenna Noble, and she was kind enough to kind of connect the dots for us to get Dean on tonight. So, Dean, how are you today?
Chris, thanks for having me on. This is certainly bittersweet for me.
Well, I'm glad. It's very nice to have you. It was good timing. I'm glad it worked out. Tell everybody who you are. Kind of give us your credentials, what you've done in your career, and then we'll sort of get on with your client John, who unfortunately lost his life on Friday.
Yeah, so my case is pretty well accounted for online on Google and through the news media. I was falsely accused of molesting my 3-year-old 35 years ago, back in the mid 80s. I was cleared, obviously, and went on to make this my living, if you will. I went on to publish books. I've written 3 books. I attained a master's degree in psychology and the law, and I have now been working cases professionally since 1995 as a forensic trial expert. So I work as both a consultant and a testimonial expert, both in family and juvenile dependency cases. I also work criminal cases as well. And I've been doing this since 1995, 25 years. I probably consulted on 25,000 cases since 1990 and have been hired in about 1,000 over the past 25 years. And I work high conflict cases, divorces, child custody battles, parental alienation cases, child abduction cases, child abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence. All of those cases fall within my framework of expertise. And so, these are high conflict cases, emotionally charged, volatile. This is known as divorce's atomic bomb, the ultimate weapon. Where young children, especially, as in John's case, can be wielded as pawns, weapons, and tools for the purpose of obtaining further equity at law and court. And that's exactly what happened in this case.
It's the worst nightmare of parental alienation, where even fathers like myself who are going through it in our custody battles, we don't know to what degree that alienating parent or that that high conflict parent will go. We're hoping that it resolves shortly over time, and it's just emotions. But we don't really know to what psychological degree we're dealing with a parent who's willing to make false allegations, who's willing to put their kids' well-being not in first place, because what it is they're suffering from either psychological or emotional issues. So, what can you tell us about what you experienced? When did you come on to John's case? When were you introduced with him? And when did you sort of get involved in his custody case?
Yeah, so John called me, Chris, in the latter part of 2019, a little over a year ago. He had already been involved for quite a while. His wife falsely accused him of domestic violence in the latter part of 2017, 2 years previous, and then took off with the kids from North Dakota to Idaho. When she did that, she violated the UCCJEA, which is every state has one. That's a Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act. She violated that state law from North Dakota. She violated the federal clean hands doctrine. She had unclean hands when she took those kids interstate. Right. And she violated the federal Parents Kidnapping and Prevention Act. She didn't tell John she was leaving with the kids. She just took off. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that was the first sign of the so-called, as I call in my book, Elusive Innocence, a fatherectomy. I'm here to eviscerate you from the lives of my kids and vice versa.
Right.
All right. Well, she didn't stop there. So John had been not getting anywhere in the courts. He had been stagnant. He went ahead and hired me the last part of 2019. I started working with his local council. We were unsuccessful in getting the mother psychologically evaluated. I then recommended John hire a lawyer from out of state to come in what's called pro hoc vice as out of state counsel, but to work with local counsel. So now we have two heads are better than one. So it was Mike Tyson time, and mother was not stopping. She was escalating her allegations. Okay, so I have the transcript testimony from the maternal grandfather who murdered my client, John Mast, and it's not pretty. I mean, he's very, he's frustrated, he's aggravated. He says John is a rapist, a sodomizer, a pedophile, a pervert, predator, all the terms. He admits in his under oath in his deposition that he will not. He's recommending to his daughter, the mother, do not foster and nurture the relationship of those kids with him. Do just the opposite. He admits that. I mean, make no mistake, this guy was very clear in his position. So you can understand. He also said that he admitted that the mother had been raped as a child by Mennonites and the Amish in Wisconsin. Right. So here's a woman, and she would accuse John not only of domestic violence, but raping her. So she accused him of raping her during the marriage. None of this has been proven, just hearsay, out of court, abject, rampant hearsay statements. We wouldn't get our day in court until May of 2020, less than a year ago, when I testified as an expert by Zoom, for the judge. And in that courtroom would be John Mast, killer. He would be there in court.
Right.
So I gave multiple opinions. The kids were being treated as de facto victims of sexual abuse before any court had adjudicated them to be abused, let alone that John was the perpetrator of the same. But so here's a mother who escalates allegations, false allegations, from domestic violence and rape to incest allegations of both her daughter and then her son, both kids. And as an expert, I can tell you, because I'm published in the area of sexual deviancy, there is no empirical data on a man or a father who would molest both genders. It's one or the other.
Right.
So I had him tested. I sent John to my colleague, who's a clinical forensic psychologist. John came back squeaky clean. No sexual interest in prepubescent children. No cognitive distortion, so he wasn't trying to justify the actual abuse because he didn't abuse anybody.
Right.
He wasn't trying to con me or con his lawyers or con the court or con the system or con his family or con himself. He was being very candid and frank that, hey, I didn't do anything wrong here. This is a clear-cut case of alienation. This is a clear-cut case, as some people would say, the silver bullet, which is really not science, but you hear that term thrown around. It's actually said, sexual allegations of divorce, as published in my book, and that is real science. At any rate, I testified for, 2 or 3 hours under oath last May, that there were many factors in my mind, not only that the mother and the maternal family were suffering from a fixed and rigid and false belief system. Well, actually, I couldn't say that. I said fixed and rigid belief system. The court has to make an adjudication of false, okay? So that only the court can rule on the ultimate issue at bar, which is John Mast is accused of abusing his kids. He'd already been cleared of abusing the mother, and credibility of witnesses, including the children. Only the court can determine that. I can lead the court to the water, if you will. I can't make him drink it.
Sure.
So the problem I had is post-testimony in late May of last year, the court didn't take 1 month, didn't take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, or 5 months. It took 6 months to make a decision on the outcome of this family. And, make no mistake, justice delayed is justice denied. And the memory of those kids is being treated with these delusions and significant persecutory ideations, and this false belief system, this ideology, these narratives that John Mast molested these kids when there was no evidence to support that. Not none whatsoever. I critiqued the forensic interviews of the children. They were not done properly. And you could tell that if it wasn't clear-cut coaching, that they were highly contaminated, highly tainted, highly adulterated. These kids, that they were badgered with this stuff. God knows how many times the maternal grandfather, John's assailant, talked about this in the household in Idaho. God knows. You'd have to be a PI or ears behind the door to know that.
Now, from what I know, and it's I'm no expert at all. I just read and listen to experts like yourself, and the one thing that I've gathered was that the one of the key behaviors of an abusive person or control is isolation, and that's where the parental alienation really stems from. Is if you can isolate the child from the other parent, you can then brainwash or alienate the other child. Is that was it with the court? So the allegation led to the isolation because the allegation kept him away from his kids.
Yeah. Clearly, the isolation succeeded the alienation to reinforce in the mindset of the kids this was going on.
Right.
You could call their little house that they kept those kids held into a little David Koresh farm, if you will. Go back to Waco around 1993, a little, if you will, isolation camp for their belief system that their children, their grandchildren were victims of molestation.
Wow.
And that's probably what was going on. You're probably right. But I was privy to the clinical session progress notes of the children's therapist. I was aware of their supervised visitation notes. And let me tell you, I've been involved in these cases, like I said, for 25 years, about 1,000 cases. This is clearly not only a severe case of alienation, it's the worst case I've seen. The gravity of the alienation was the worst I have seen in conjunction with those supervised visitation notes. We're talking about a little 8-year-old girl who spit on her father, who bit her father, who threw things at her father, who said to him, "Beware of the swayer," meaning you're swaying us, you're swaying my mother, my grandparents, you're conning everybody. You're trying to beat this rap. You're trying to beat the system. We know you did it.
Wow.
We know you did that. So you understand how this belief system, what we call in psychology confirmatory bias, is a preconceived notion. This is what they think is going on.
Right.
And now reinforcing that notion, that belief system. And so I testified to that under oath. And I think I made an impression upon the court. And the behaviors that I was just announcing by the daughter were also repeated by the son. It was horrible. It was horrible to the point where the supervised visitation person was not stopping anything. She was allowing it to continue. And so we couldn't get into court to try to fix this. We finally had a court date, like I said, last May. And the judge took 6 months to make a ruling, and he did clear John Mast of all abuse, domestic violence, child sexual abuse, everything under the sun. Obviously, that didn't sit well with Mr. Brashear, the alleged assailant, I should say, because he is innocent until proven guilty, even though news reports say he admitted at the scene, confessed to the shooting and the killing of John Mast. But I'm going to go by the law. He is innocent until proven guilty. He is an alleged assailant, not a guilty assailant yet, even though he, in his term, gleaned my client to be guilty of molestation before he was tried in a court of law. Once he was tried in a court of law, he was found not guilty, basically, John Mast. But make no mistake, James Brashear became an alleged judge, jury, and executioner all by himself. And clearly, I think it emboldened the daughter, the mother in this case. I think they were working, if you will, quid pro quo. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so so we get this order a couple of months ago, and obviously gasoline pouring on the fire. John, I told John, make no mistake, I had several conversations with John in the last year. You gotta have eyes behind your head. You gotta wear a body cam. You might have to wear a bulletproof vest when you go
to protect himself from anything further, because we all know that even once an alienation case gets resolved. Let's say a judge allows you to see you still have a target on your back, because now they're probably coming at you harder if you get to be around your kids more.
Well, and you know, if you read the chapter on SAID in my book, if you Google that syndrome, SAID, sexual allegations and divorce, you're going to read about a person who will not take no for an answer. They
Right.
just will not accept no for an answer by CPS, by the professionals, by the court. They don't care. In their minds, he's guilty. He did it. He got away with it. He beat the rap, and we're gonna lay down the law. It becomes a case of anarchy.
Right.
You know. And so that's exactly what happened here. And John walked into a trap big time. He was, ambushed, obviously. Instead of going to see those kids 72 hours ago, he walked into a gun.
What led to the beginning of the allegations in the relationship? Was it the end of the relationship? How did it start?
Yeah. So make no mistake, John admitted he had affairs on the mother. Obviously, the mother had motive right there to hurt him, if you will, or seek revenge, because she was upset clearly over the affairs. And they went to this restaurant in North Dakota, and an incident occurred in that restaurant. That incident led to domestic violence charges against John, by John against his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And John had to go to court on that. That wasn't decided until September of 2018, about a year later, that he was innocent of that allegation.
Right.
The child sex allegations had already started, but didn't run its gamut until the latter part of 2019, about the time I was on board, when allegations started cropping up against the son, which I knew in my mind as an expert that this is just a bunch of poppycock.
Right.
And I mean, this is not just, this isn't even well-meaning, well-intentioned and misguided. This is just pure confabulation at this point, And I mean, and I recall some of the signs and symptoms of behaviors of the kids. I mean, there were allegations of bedwetting and nightmares and flashbacks and some stuff like that. And you can see that in child sex abuse. You can also see that in 1,000 other things.
Right.
Such as separation anxiety.
Right.
You got that picture. These kids love their father.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak a little bit to that myself. In my own case, my ex, unfortunately, has been taking my kids to therapists and trying to get them diagnosed with autism, ADHD, anxiety disorder, sensory processing disorder. And each time I sort of interjected, and they were prescribed SSRI medications and put on one medication that the doctor suggested, and I wasn't even told about the doctor visit. And there was an adverse side effect, and they immediately took them off of that. So apparently in the last year or so of me being a little more proactive in the medical, which when we were together, I worked most of the time, and she sort of tended to those things. And I started noticing more doctor's visits and things like that. And as soon as I sort of interjected and started asking questions, apparently my son's autism and anxiety and all those things disappeared. But I did suggest to the doctor that environmental issues might be the cause, or being, like you said, they love their father. All of a sudden, dad's gone. And, in my case, a new man was living there pretty quickly. And it's a lot for a child. And then you're not seeing your dad. And I don't even know half the things that were said to my kids. And it's hard as a father, as a natural protector, to be restricted by a legal system that isn't an expert in the psychological issues that we're dealing with.
Right. And in your situation, and in many cases I come across my play kids that have ADHD, which is now called ADS in the DSM-5. The doctors will treat the kids with what's called Vyvanse, and Vyvanse can cause hallucinations. Okay.
And that may have been what was given. I have to look at the medical records. I have them in the other room.
But in John's case, the mother unilaterally cherry picked this therapist in Idaho and placed the kids in with her, you know, and she was doing play therapy, which there's a whole chapter on that in my book.
I've done
You
that.
know, dolls and puppets and drawings, and let me tell you, you know, one of my longtime associates, Dr. Stephen Ceci, CECI is how you spell his last name. He is the co-author of the book Jeopardy in the Courtroom. And Dr. Ceci, arguably the premier expert in the world on child development and child suggestibility. And little kids, you know, they are very suggestible. They, you know, you could talk about the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, Peter Pan, the Easter Bunny. They could talk about Daddy touched my pee-pee. And especially a mother like this who has a background where she was, you know, sodomized by Mennonites and Amish in Wisconsin as a child and raped allegedly by John Mast as an adult during the marriage. So you can only imagine the words and the stories going through the minds of the kids talked about by the three adults in that household, the mother and the two grandparents.
Right.
And that's what happens here. And when you get that reinforced by a therapist who doesn't talk to the alleged perpetrator, my client, no contact with him, no interview with him.
Right.
She's only getting one side of the story. Well, who's vetting the case?
Right.
Who is seeking alternative hypotheses, other
Right.
reasons why the kids are saying what they're saying? Well, that guy is me. That guy happens to be me. And fortunately, you know, John got me on board. You know, the old saying, better late than never.
Sure.
Well, obviously, you know, I helped clear his name, but I didn't help what happened 3 nights ago.
Right.
You know, and I'm literally beside myself, you know, trying to figure out in my brain what could have I done differently to, you know, to make, you know, to stop that from happening. You know, what could I have done being 1,500, 2,000 miles away from the crime scene? What could I have done differently? I'm in Florida.
Right.
So, you know, I never met John. The closest I got to him was over a computer screen by Zoomcast last May during my testimony.
Right.
You know, so you go back and you check your episodic memory, your explicit memory, and you're trying to juggle your memory and say, you know, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What did I leave out totally? You know, and you know, I had some issues with the local attorney. Make no mistake, I'm not an easy guy to get along with. Right. I mean, I have my own legal theory and strategy in a case that may not be the same as the lawyer.
Right.
You know, the lawyer's the lawyer. The lawyer files motions, petitions, argues the case in a court of law. I'm the expert. We're supposed to get along, you know, and all I's dotted, T's crossed. But sometimes it becomes oil and water.
Right.
And we don't get along.
Well, the interest should be the truth and justice, but that's not what happens.
Well, and you know, I was upset when we filed a motion and the judge denied it in trying to get the mother psychologically evaluated. So none of the 3 people in that little David Koresh fortress, if you will, in Idaho, were psychologically evaluated. We had no empirical raw test data on those 3 individuals. We had no idea that the maternal grandfather was a ticking time bomb.
Right. Now, do you think what has happened, you know, we talked about it briefly, you know, how do we share this story and sort of get to the root issue where we kind of discussed how mainstream media is going to take this as a tragic story of a custody battle gone bad, and someone did something terrible, and it'll kind of get swept under the rug after a few months, and we'll start talking about COVID-19 again or something ridiculous, and we'll never get to the root of these types of murders or parental alienation or you know the reason that men's suicide is as high as it is, and we never talk about the cycle of psychological abuse and you know when the accuser is typically the abuser. We never talk about that, and it happens so commonplace. What do you think we need to do? You know, besides speaking on a broadcast like this, you know, we're not Fox News or anything, but we need to come together as a community who actually cares about parents and kids and ending the cycle of dysfunction.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, whenever I get involved in a case, Chris, I put it right on the line, to the client. What do you want out of this case? Well, obviously you want your name cleared. What kind of custody do you want? You still want the mother in the picture or not? And I get back to the science and the old saying, the best parent is both parents, right?
Right.
Kids need both parents.
Right.
But there's a caveat to that, and that caveat is, you just mentioned it. If we have a false accuser,
Right.
if we have a parent who's manipulating the minds of those kids,
is it going to continue? Should
we allow that parent custody at all,
right,
or unsupervised time at all? Well, John says no. He told me, Dean, I want sole physical legal custody. Okay, that's what we're going to seek. I'm going to tell the lawyers that's what we're going for here.
Right.
So we didn't get that. We did not get that. Make no mistake, this judge came up short in his ruling in December of 2020. John was cleared. John did get overnight visitation for the first time in over 3 years. But he didn't get what he was seeking, which is I want sole physical legal custody to take those children away from that therapist, away from that house where they're being contaminated and psychologically abused,
right.
Where my name is being spilled as a pervert, as a predator. I didn't do anything wrong. That's the only order that's on the table here. We didn't get that. So
why are judges not looking at the fact that, okay, this man has been lied about for 3 years. We just cleared his name from these allegations, but they're not looking at the fact that, all right, well, this person's an abusive, dangerous person.
And I testified to that. I testified to the iatrogenic, harmful effects of the false accusations.
Mm-hmm.
I testified to the fact that that these false allegations, this alienation, is consistent with what's called an ACE or ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and that if you get a test score of 4 or over, that is predictive that this kid is going to be a problem later on in life, mentally and physically.
Right.
And have big time psychosomatic issues, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, vomiting, could lead to depression, could lead to suicidal ideation, self-mutilation, and themselves as potential homicidal people, right?
Right.
Judge, I don't know. Look, I got a 27-page court order. It wasn't what I hoped for, obviously. The judge is the judge. This judge has blood on his hands, in my opinion. That may not change anything, and my job is to help the attorneys intersect the facts of the case with the science and the law in court. That's my job. I feel I did my job correctly in this case.
Well, tell me what you think needs to be done. Obviously, we use the word reform in family law and custody and divorce. When we're dealing with people who, let's just say, don't break up that well, because they maybe came from abuse themselves, or came from fatherless homes, or they were molested or abused, and they recreate that narrative that broken child, that abused child many times grows up to become a parent, and repeats that narrative through their children, and it just sort of shifts the characters around. And instead of them being the child that was abused, they're now the protective parent of the abuser, and they create these scenarios. We're dealing with a legal system, and a lot of this isn't about legality. It's like you said, it's more about psychology and emotion.
And what it is, Chris, and what I try to articulate to the attorneys, it's undiagnosed and untreated F24 in the ICD-10. F24 in the ICD-10. ICD is our medical Bible. DSM is our psychiatric psychological Bible. And what that is shared delusional disorder, shared psychotic disorder.
Right.
What's called folie à deux, false belief system. A false belief system that can be projected, that has been projected by a parent onto the children. So the children attach to that same belief system. Basically 3 people as one. Okay. And so we never got that because I told you the motion for IME, which is a motion for independent medical or psychiatric examination of the mother, was denied. The judge denied that motion. I had a knockdown drag out with local counsel in North Dakota. I didn't feel he laid proper legal foundation for that pleading. I thought that pleading was absolutely unequivocally necessary to be granted, and that John knew he had to pay for this if the judge granted it, and that we had an objective expert, do a mental status examination, clinical interview, 6 or 7 hours of psychometric testing on the mother to see what the diagnoses are coming up with the mother, whether it's borderline personality disorder, histrionic, narcissistic, paranoid delusional, or this F24 in the ICD-10, or the entire kit and caboodle. We didn't have any of that because we never got her evaluated. So my client, John Mast, was continually under legal microscope, continually had to prove a negative, continually had to prove he wasn't guilty of a crime he never committed, of an act he never committed.
Right. So as soon as this whole thing kicked off, he was already behind in the race.
Oh yeah, by the time he called me, he was already on his second attorney, and getting nowhere fast.
And we talked a little about the suicide rate of these men. A lot of these men don't last as long as me or John. A lot of these men take their own lives, and then we blame those men for having drug issues or psychological issues. Would you kind of speak on that a little bit, and let's sort of get to the root of the problem instead of just we go, oh well, tragically this man killed himself, and we never dig into the why, but we sort of know the why. Would you mind speaking on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, and we're getting down to dollar signs, Chris. I mean, in family court in America, you get as much justice as you can afford.
Right.
Sad but true. John Mast was fortunate that he had the resources to be able to hire myself and attorneys. By the time we finished the case, I know he had at least attorney number 3. He also hired another person before me, 2 other people, actually. One was a psychologist. Plus, he went to my doctor for testing. So we're talking about multiple PhDs, multiple mental health professionals, and multiple attorneys that John had over a period of 3+ years of litigation. Yeah. A lot of people can't afford that.
No.
I mean, this can bankrupt you in a New York minute. And I work a lot of cases where judges order my fees to be paid for by the state. You have to prove you're indigent, what's called informa pauperis. Okay, you're a poor person. But beyond that, you have to be involved in a CPS TPR case, which means your parental rights could be terminated, or you have to be involved in a criminal case where you're under arrest in order to make that happen. So in those 2 venues, juvenile court, criminal court, you're entitled to due process, experts and lawyers at the expense of the state if you're indigent or poor. Not so in family court. In family court, you get as much justice as you can afford.
Well, and we can get into the whole industry. It's designed that way. Literally, family court, civil court is the let's call it the godfather of the courts. It's the bread and butter. It's where the money comes from. It's emotional people, divorce, assets, attorneys, custody battles. We're fighting over the most important things in our lives. And we're hurting so badly trying to hang on to them that we're literally willing to be impoverish and sell our kidneys to be parents, to hang on to a home, to hang on to anything that we have. And the system is designed to strip everything from us and leave either both or one person broken. And the people that are suffering, who these courts are claiming are in the best interest of the children, the best interest of the children is not broken parents. It's not John Mast being dead. It's not their grandfather going to prison. It's not their mother potentially going to prison. These kids lost a lot on Friday, not just their father. And they're going to now either repeat this cycle and wind up in the system themselves. They're going to be dead, or they're going to be in jail. And that's what the system is doing, is it's creating new clientele all the time by destroying families and children.
And I'm not the trier and finder of fact, Chris. I'm just an expert. So, the judge has to rule on the ultimate issues at bar, which is parenting time, custody, child support, maintenance, marital assets. All that stuff is determined by the judge.
Right.
And like I said, and make no mistake, we're in a court where the legal burden of proof is 51%. preponderance of evidence, prima facie evidence, more evidence than not. So it's a very slippery slope where a judge can make a mistake on the side of caution, err on the side of caution, not on John Mast's side, on the side of those children. And that's probably why he didn't get custody.
Right.
And, because the judge is rolling around in his head, well, yeah, Tong was convincing, but, there's always that what if, because when this happens, this is an act for only the perpetrator, the victim, and God is present. There's no witnesses, right? In a child sex case, right? There's no witnesses unless you have medical evidence. You're not going to have any witnesses. Right. So the judge is rolling around his head. The kids have had stability and permanency with this mother. Mm-hmm. They're young children. What kind of a demon would I be if I extricated those children away from the mother,
right,
and the maternal family who only know that family, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm playing devil's advocate, but that's the thinking of a judge,
right?
And I'm not in agreement with that. Make no mistake, because look what happened Friday night.
No, and people like yourself should be educating these judges. These judges need new further education in what we're dealing with because they're making the wrong decisions.
Well, look, trauma, Chris, can be quantified. Okay, so in the old DSM-4, we had what's called the GAF scale score, Axis 5, which is the global assessment of functioning. And if you had a trauma score of 51 or lower, that was consistent with trauma. The lower the number, the higher the incidence of trauma. Well, we're not on the multi-axial scale anymore. In 2013, this all shifted to the DSM-5. Now we're on what's called the HUDAS system. But trauma can still be measured. And I don't know the level of trauma these kids had allegedly when they were treated by this therapist in Idaho, because that number was never quantified by this therapist. I never had a number in the note. I had all of her clinical session progress notes. But clearly there was confirmatory bias, not only by the family, but by this therapist who had a preconceived notion John Mast molested these kids.
Do you think that we need to start questioning the accusers and treating them and investigating the accuser just as much as the apparent abusive person?
I mean, you asked about reform earlier and changes in policy and legislation, and it's a whole system that needs to be revamped. And
right.
Not only do we need to elevate the burden of proof in the law by going from preponderance of evidence to clear and convincing evidence up to 75% in all family courts, we need to make false accusations a felony. It's a felony in my state of Florida. It is a felony. You will go to prison in Florida statute 39.205 subsection 9. If you are arrested and prosecuted and convicted of that, you're going away for 5 years. Now, mine may be one of 3 or 4 states in America that do that. Yeah, that needs to be pervasive all across America.
Exactly. And again, or everybody needs to have children in your state.
Yeah. And then the legislature in Washington, D.C., and I'm talking about Joe Biden, the same guy who co-authored the Violence Against Women's Act in 1994 under President Bill Clinton. So, good luck on this happening. But I'm about to say what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is we need to repeal CAPTA, which, if you're not familiar with CAPTA, that's the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, also known as the Mondale Act from 1974, almost 50 years ago. That needs to be repealed because that's what started this engine running, known as CPS.
Right.
Okay. That needs to be repealed. Then 20 years later, we got VAWA, Joe Biden's baby.
Violence Against Women's Act.
Yeah. So a woman only needs to give a statement of fear, threaten bodily harm, no proof, no evidence, just like no fault divorce, and bam, you have an ex parte protection order against you. You're not seeing her, but you're also not seeing the kids by proxy. Okay. And now we take that up to 1997 to, the elite, the Clintons, Hillary and Bill, and the Adoption Safe Families Act, also known as ASFA. And that allowed for quick termination of parental rights within 12 to 15 months. And that's what's going on. And of course, we all know about foster care in this country is a proverbial nightmare. So those are the 3 laws that need to be repealed. And you also have, of course, Titles 4D and E of the Social Security Act, which supply all the money that keeps funding this system into Washington, D.C., and then disseminated from there to the states.
which pretty much promotes, profit over parenting.
Exactly.
So, what do we do to men? I'm a father. You're a father as well. You've gotten yourself involved heavily, and you took your experience and you turned it into a profession and an advocacy, and you've probably done a lot more good than you even know. What is your advice to parents like me who are starting a podcast from the beginning? Despite how my custody case goes, I will be on here. There will be evidence of what reality is for my children and their children, my grandchildren. What do you believe in your personal and expert opinion? What do we need to do both as a movement for shared parenting and protecting these kids, and having reform in our family court, CPS, foster care, child support, this whole money racket that's been created, which is essentially child trafficking legalized?
Right. Well, I'm going to correct you on one thing. I'm not an advocate other than for what's right, what's wrong, what's truth, and what's justice. I have to be objective on the 50-yard line. So as an expert, because I give opinions to reasonable degrees of psychological, scientific certainty, I have to be objective. I cannot be seen or viewed as an advocate. And mind you, I'm not.
Okay.
With that said, as a newbie to the podcast, I had my own show, but maybe 15 years ago. I suggest you consider tackling all these issues, not just false allegations of abuse, parental alienation, parental kidnapping, parental abduction, and even to obviously heinous, reprehensible crimes like what just happened to my client, John Mast, and murder. But the other side, mothers who are victims of this travesty as well, mothers who come across my plate who are falsely accused of Munchausen syndrome by proxy,
right,
which is now called pediatric condition falsification, factitious disorder imposed upon another. Mothers falsely accused of coaching their kids to falsely accuse the father of incest. Okay, right. I get this all the time. The court is like in a conundrum, and they're tossing the dice. Is this a case of a protective parent, and the guy actually molested the kids, or is this a guy who's been a targeted victim of severe alienation, and the mother's coaching the kids?
Right.
Well, it's not what you know. It's not what you think you know. It's what you can prove in a court of law. So you say there's coaching, you got to prove there's coaching. The best evidence, and by the way, there's a rule in law called the best evidence rule. The best evidence comes from the child's DVD interview at the Child Advocacy Center on whether that kid was coached or not. Okay.
Right.
So when little Sally says to Mary Jones, the interviewer, when Mary Jones asks her, "Hey, tell me how Daddy touched your pee-pee," well, that's leading. It's suggestive. It's negative stereotype abduction because it's pointing the finger at the father. That's not a proper question.
Right.
That is a trash question. So you want to ask little Sally, "Can you tell me what happened? Tell me about that. Tell me more about that." So you're tapping into the kid's autobiographical free recall memory, her implicit memory, her unconscious memory, the same memory she brushes her hair, puts her clothes and dress on, takes a shower. That's the memory we're trying to tap into. We're not trying to tap into her explicit memory, her episodic memory that could be coached, contaminated, poisoned by brainwashing, or even unwitting coaching. So you have two types of coaching. You have intentional and unintentional. So if Sally's coming down the stairs and here's mommy on the phone to her mother, the maternal grandmother, that SOB molested my daughter last night. So Sally just heard that. That is unintentional coaching.
Right.
And maybe mom doesn't even know the kid heard that. Right.
Right.
And so, finally, I'm the guy on the other side of the fence who's looking at that DVD upon critique once we get it in discovery, once we get it from the government.
Right.
And then if the kid's been a victim of coaching. A lot of times these interviewers don't even screen the kids for coaching.
Do you think that your type of expertise is what's required in these courts as more than even, let's say, litigation and attorneys?
Well, under Florida statute 90.616 subsection 3C, I'm considered an essential witness, meaning for the defense, I can both consult in the gallery for the lawyer during the case in chief, to help the lawyer with questions on direct and cross and redirect and recross of opposing fact and expert witnesses, as well as our witnesses on direct. But I can also testify. So I'm the only expert person, if you will, who can be excluded from what's called the rule of sequestration. Every other witness who's going to testify, you got to leave the courtroom. I don't have to do that. I can stay. I can stay in because I'm considered an essential witness.
So tell us a little bit. I'm gonna pull up your website here and share that for a minute. But is it just you? A lot of people are wanting help. Obviously, I'm seeing on the screen a lot of people are chatting. What can people do? Do you work with other folks around the country?
I don't, Chris. I'm a lone ranger, and I have been for a quarter century, back to the 90s. My website's been on the net for almost 25 years now, back to 96, 97. And sadly, there aren't many people, if any, coming up behind me that do what I do. And clearly there needs to be, there needs to be help out there for the lawyers, and with all due respect to the attorneys. And mind you, I work with some really, really good attorneys. What you hear on Facebook, lawyers suck, and, he stole my money and I'm going to turn him into the bar, and, Supreme Court's going to sanction him and, or her. I work with some really super lawyers, Martindale, Hubbell, AV rated, board certified attorneys who really have a clue as to what's going on. Lawyers who only do these cases and litigate and try these cases for a living. And then you got the other type of lawyer, the lawyer who will be quick to accept your retainer check. You haven't vetted that lawyer properly. There's a page at the website. There's a page right there at my website. If you scroll along the top there, how to choose your attorney. There's a whole page of how to choose your attorney. And it's in my book too, appendix, how to choose your attorney. And so very important that you ask the right questions of your lawyer. What kind of experience do you have in these types of questions? They're not going to give you their client references. They can't. Those are attorney-client privilege. But you want to ask them, how many cases have you tried successfully in this type of case? Any other lawyers, any peers that you can reach out to me that I can contact on your behalf. Go to avo.com. Avo.com is the #1 site for legal reviews for attorneys. But it's very important that that I have a marriage with counsel, that the client and the lawyer and I work as the three musketeers.
Right. So, I'm pleasantly surprised to meet you under unfortunate circumstances. And I know we briefly discussed a few of my issues as well. And Wednesday, I actually have a motion to modify custody. Mine has been going on for a few years. Although, you would think that you would hope that it's not going to turn out sadly like John's case has, and it's very shocking to a lot of people what happened, and it happens more often than we think. But like Dean and I had mentioned earlier, the mainstream media won't really give this case and this story the attention it deserves. And Dean, you and I will speak after this interview, and I'd love to actually chat with you about my case more and possibly have you help me and my children as well. But tell us what you want to know about John and his case, and what you got to know about him as a person, as a client, as a father, what he was dedicated to, the type of man that you knew him to be. I didn't know him. I only know him from the movement and mutual folks within this movement. He was an advocate as well, not just a father fighting his own battle. But like me, he decided that he needed to speak up. Tell us what you want people to know about John.
Yeah. So again, I never met John in person, but the half a dozen conversations I had with him, great guy, hardworking guy, loved his kids. He clearly tried to do the right thing here. Never tried to violate the law. Never tried to take the law in his own hands. He listened to me. How much he listened, I don't know. He was not as passionate as I am. You can feel the passion with me. I've been in this field 35 years. So
right.
John, God rest his soul, was 40 years old. John was a little kid when I got started in this field, right? So I can't retrain people's minds and how they act in life and their personalities. Your personality is what it is. I'm a type A personality guy. I'm not just here for a paycheck. You can pretty much tell that on a case. I want to seek the truth. I'm trying to solve a puzzle, doing my own internal investigation. But John talked to a lot of people. He talked to too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen. I tried to advise him to stay on the sidelines, let your legal team, your defense team take this over and run with it and try to get you justice as soon as we can. Understand that with COVID and the slowness of that, slowing things down, we were going to have issues. We actually, the lawyers were actually in court. This case was not a total case by Zoom. This case, I was by Zoom, but most of the people were actually physically in the courtroom last May. I think we got COVID in March of last year. But John talked to a lot of people, and I didn't want him to do that. He was trying to get, probably challenging my opinions, which is fine. You don't have to take my advice verbatim. I'm not God here. You're welcome to talk to whoever you want to talk to, but I do recommend you let your legal team, who you're paying, your defense team, do that work, and help you in court and out of court, and so I had a little issue with that. But this guy traveled 15 hours to see his kids. He didn't miss a visit. He was a crackerjack, all that time in the inclement weather from North Dakota to Idaho to see those kids. Love those kids, try to be in their lives. And it just wasn't going to happen. And the fact that it wasn't going to happen was clearly premeditated.
Right. So what do we want people to take from, this discussion? And I hope to have you on a lot more as well. And we can tackle individual issues as well.
So look, this case was a taboo to start with, right? Because it was dealing with taboo allegations.
Right.
And it wound up to be the ultimate taboo. That can't happen. That can never happen. The last case I had that was a homicide was 15 years ago, where my client was the perpetrator, not the victim. But it can't happen. You cannot take the law in your own hands. That's why we have a legal system. And, if you don't like the judge in your case, then file a motion to recuse that judge. Right. Or do what you have to do. But don't take the law in your own hands. So look, this homicide case could trigger many other court cases. We already have a state of Idaho versus James Brashear case, right? The alleged assailant. We could have a CPS case where they're taking those kids out of that home and hopefully placing them with John's family.
Right.
We could also have a lawsuit for wrongful death and breach of proper standard of care for treating those kids with that therapist wrongly, harming those kids, not helping those kids, but pouring gasoline on that fire.
Right. It's a sad thing, and I'm very grateful to have you and have Jenna Noble, who I want to mention, connect us to have this conversation. I want to have more conversations with you, and I want everyone to keep sharing John's story and keep fighting your own battles. We're not going to change this. You said, don't take the law into your own hands. And that's right. Like, violence is not the way you want to go. I know what's happening to a lot of us parents is abusive. And it's hard to emotionally and mentally and financially and physically sustain. John, 3 years. I'm a little over 2 years. I've not had such a crazy allegation against me. So I do see my kids every other weekend, but there's virtually no contact in between. And I'm with time, I'm learning to contain those emotions. But I spend my energy speaking to experts and people like you. This is what I do. This is how I feel better. And
it's cathartic. It's
Yeah,
cathartic, and
Dean,
I recommend other people do so.
give some folks some advice on how they can deal with the longevity that these courts cases, unfortunately, like you said, um, justice that's that takes a long time is not justice at all. When you're a parent, either being fully kept from, or partially kept from, or mostly kept from your children, and a lot of times we sort of disregard men's emotions, because the masculinity of men is supposed to be that we can deal with anything, and I can tell you that we hurt just like others.
Forget about that in this issue, Chris. Forget about that macho mindset in these cases.
Right.
Let me tell you, Mike Tyson went to prison in 1993 for raping that Desiree Washington. These allegations will bring you to your knees, and
Right.
they're tougher than Mike Tyson. I can
Right.
tell you. So if you're accused of child abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, parental alienation, you have to disprove that in a court of law. Usually you can't do that with just a lawyer. Okay, you can't, because in family court, as you probably have learned, Chris, a lot of hearsay is legally admissible. It's coming in. It's coming in because the judge has a lot of discretion in these cases.
Right. There's no criteria. It's just,
well, there are exceptions to the hearsay rule, and certainly, but if a child says she's been molested or abused or physically abused, to a therapist or a doctor, or to a CPS professional or to a teacher, I can tell you right now that's coming in. I can tell you right now.
right.
And the law says in order for a judge or jury to determine credibility of a child's allegations, that child has to be spontaneous, reliable, and trustworthy. Those are the three factors right there: spontaneous, reliable, and trustworthy. So my job as an expert is to glean whether that allegation was reported spontaneously with reliability and trustworthiness, or is contaminated, tainted, and adulterated. So I can give the opposite opinion if I find the science connects for that opinion.
Well, Dean, we're right at an hour. And we could keep talking all night. I could probably talk to you for another hour, but we can save it for another episode. I'd love to chat with you a little bit when we get off here. Here is your website. It is abuse-excuse.com. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
All right. And this is Dean's website. You can reach him here. Do you have a social media platform? Obviously, there's a link here as well with a fax number, phone number, cell phone number.
On those should take you right to my Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, which obviously I'm more available on Facebook by Messenger or posts. I won't be able to answer everybody because obviously my cases require and obligate me to pay a lot of attention to that first.
Sure.
And I average probably as many cases, no brag fact, as a social worker in any state in child protection across America. I average about 15 to 20 cases at all times across my plate. So I'm a very busy guy. I've had over 1 million hits at that website. Obviously, that's over almost 25 years, but still a lot of traffic for one guy.
Right.
So judges understand, juries understand, professionals understand. There are two sides to every coin. That is no more evident than in these cases. But being able to articulate that other side, that sometimes can be a needle in a haystack.
Right. Well, Dean, why don't we jump off here tonight and let's get you back on very soon. You could be episode 2 because I kind of want to keep continuing this conversation. But let's chat after the episode, and we will talk to everybody soon, and to John Mast's family. We our hearts are with you.
Thank you for having me, and John, man, rest in peace, brother.
Yeah, man. And let's pray for his kids, because that's where the healing needs to go right now. So
yeah, and for the audience out there who's watching or listening, there is a GoFundMe page at my Facebook timeline page. So please check that out. I believe Jenna Noble got that up and running. So if you can, whatever you can donate to John's kids and family on their behalf, that would be appreciated.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Dean, let's stick around and chat after this, but we're going to go ahead and sign off for the first episode of We the Parents. We appreciate you having you.
Thank you.
Thanks.